I'm going to hand over now to Sinéad Gavin, the representation manager at LSESU, who's going to share their process of the democracy review they've done, how that's evolved over the last 2 years, and what they've learned over the way that can be useful to educators across the institution. So, thank you.
Hi everyone, so I'm Sinéad, I'm the representation manager at the Student Union, and along with my head department Ricardo here, we have been working on the democracy review for about the past 2 years at the Student Union. It's been a journey. So first of all, what is the democracy review? So it was essentially just a massive whole-scale review of how LSESU is set up democratically. So that's looking at our bylaws, the rules for how we run essentially, who are elected officers, two of whom are here, how motions are passed, how students can exercise their voice, and how we actually hold those officers to account so that they actually do what they're meant to do. So why did we do that? We hadn't even looked at our democratic structure and from at least 2010, probably before that, but that's when our records go to. And we had quite low engagement from students, and the students that we were getting engaged in our systems weren't very representative of who the students are. So obviously LSE students are majority postgrad, majority international. We were getting majority home undergrad students engaging with our systems. A lot of our positions were going unfilled and uncontested, and the students that were getting into those positions, we were kind of getting constant feedback that they weren't feeling as supported as they wanted. They were finding it quite difficult to balance their roles alongside their studies, and they just wanted a bit more support generally. So what did we do? We carried out all student survey and focus groups with particularly groups that we weren't finding engaged in our structures already to kind of get broad understandings as well. And then we carried out a democracy summit, which was 3 days, and we had 24 students that we selected by sortition. So that's essentially similar to jury service, where we select students to be representative of the wider student body. So if 70% of LSE students are postgrads, 70% of those 24 students will be postgrad, and so forth. And then we all came together for 3 days of learning, deliberation, and ultimately recommendations from those students on how we should develop our democracy going forward so that it best serves students. So that was 2 years ago. What have we implemented since then? So what I personally consider to be the biggest change that's come out of that is student panels. So previously, if students wanted to put forward policy proposals to the student union, they'd have to submit it, and then it would go to a vote of all students, simple majority of kind of yes or no. Lots of issues related to that, which I won't go into, but what we do now is we've got student panels where we have 20 students selected via sortition, again, so that they're representative of the whole student body. They are then presented with that proposal by both the proposer itself. They'll also hear from if there's any opposer who doesn't think that the motion should be passed, and they'll also hear from informed voices, so people that we've invited who have got some sort of expert understanding or personal lived experience or can provide a different perspective on the issue that's being discussed. Then those 20 students will, being facilitated by people in the student union, will kind of discuss the motion, deliberate on whether there's any amendments they want, and ultimately vote on whether they think it should pass or not. If 75% or more think yeah, it immediately becomes student policy. If 75% say no, it fails, and if it falls between that bracket, it will go forward to a referendum or all-student vote, similar to the one that happened on Tuesday regarding divestment. So that first went to a student panel, but only got 72%, just missed that threshold, and went forward to referendum. So here we've got beautiful little pictures of the student panel in play. So we've got James, who's our student facilitator, who actually leads those sessions on our behalf. We've got a student proposer there presenting his idea, and then the students kind of discussing those ideas and whether they think it should become student policy. Some other things we implemented, we have an accountability board now, so again, 6 students selected via sortition. We love sortition at the Student Union. They're paid for 10 town halls to ask the executive officers kind of questions about what they've been up to, and to make sure that they can really delve deep into those reports and think critically and in a more nuanced way about what they want to ask. We've changed the executive committee, so we've gone down from 13 part-time officers to just 6, and they are now paid as well, and we're able to provide more staff support now that there's fewer of them. We also created an academic subcommittee, so they're kind of the link now between the executive committee and the academic reps that are in all of these different courses and departments. And that's making sure that the executive committee are getting voices directly from all of the different levels of study, so from all postgrad research, postgrad talk, and that's going directly into the executive officers' meetings. So what happened next? So we have seen really fantastic results from the democracy review implementations we've put in. Our voter turnout at elections has more than doubled. For context, the countrywide averages for student union elections is about 12%, so we're well over double that now. Positions are getting consistently filled and contested, whereas previously it was just 50-50 whether they did. And really excitingly, we're getting really high postgraduate candidate and voter percentages, which was one of the really key aims that we were going for in this democracy review. Some beautiful graphs as well to highlight that. And then kind of more broadly, democratic engagement has really increased. So previously, we were 5 motions submitted in a year in 2022 it was a pretty bumper year. We were pretty chuffed with ourselves. None of those were from students that weren't directly engaged with the student union. However, they all came from sabbatical officers or part-time officers. Then the year following the democracy review being implemented, we had 29 motions, 24 of which were submitted by non-SU affiliated students, and this year we had 11 all submitted by non-SU affiliated students. We've also seen a big increase in referendum votes, 2,500 in the one on Tuesday. That's 5 times the previous highest referendum turnout. And we're also getting really reliable and consistent input from the student leaders that are elected. They're turning up to meetings, they're providing consistent input, they're really engaged, they're really motivated, and that's because they feel valued by the student union now that we're paying them and really supporting them in kind of the work that they're doing. I also really like this quote at the bottom from one of the student panelists. So I love the opportunity to represent students and their views in front of the SU, as I truly believe that I was making a change. And that was kind of the big output that we wanted from the democracy review, like students to feel that what they're doing mattered and it was making a change. So what have we learned? So first things first, students want to be involved in democracy. They want to have their voices heard. If you're kind of feeling that, oh, student feedback, we're not getting it, students are apathetic, they can't be bothered to get involved, that is not the case. It is definitely the systems that are surrounding students. Students love to be heard. And there's different forms of democracy that work better for different types of students. It's obvious to say, but our previous democratic system was working fantastically for home and undergraduate students. But there's different things that we need to implement to get the voices from across the spectrum of students. So now that we've got these different formats where postgrads can get involved via the academic subcommittee, they've got kind of less of a time commitment that way, they're getting paid, we're able to get those voices in that way. And then the final thing is engagement begets more engagement. We're consistently seeing students that are involved in one form of our new democratic systems are then going forward and getting involved in all different ways. So we've got students that are attending student panels, being selected and paid, and then they're coming back the next term as a proposer because they put in a proposal themselves. And so key takeaways then is just sortition is brilliant. We love it at the Student Union. It means that students have a really thorough understanding of the issues that they're discussing, and crucially those students that are present, and these guys here were recognising as well, they were all master's students, they were all international, there wasn't the broad spectrum there. Sortition means that you 100% will have that, especially those students that are too busy, like don't feel like their voices are heard, feel really apathetic. They will at least be in the room and then you can change their minds. And bringing those students into those democratic processes then means that they are going to be more engaged in all of the other things we're doing as well. The cons to it, it is much more time intensive, there are much more associated costs, and therefore you've got some limits to kind of the amount of topics you can discuss. So it's definitely a quality over quantity when it comes to kind of sortition focus on student feedback. But from my personal opinion, I think it's 100% worth it. Yeah, Ricardo, would you agree?
100%.
But yeah, that is kind of my whistle-stop tour. There's some sort of questions to like take home, kind of think about how you might want to include sortition or payment within your own departments and your own work. But yeah, we love it at the Student Union. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sinéad. because I think what you've really illustrated there is that kind of effective, meaningful student voice doesn't happen. It requires lots of careful consideration, thought, planning, and a supportive structure underneath to enable it. So I think that's a really interesting example. We've got time for a couple of questions if anyone wants to ask Sinéad anything while she's here. Yes.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's a wonderful example where the LSE Student Union is not doing only a process reform internally, but contributing to, of course, a very live society-wide conversation about the future of democracy. There are many sort of technical aspects to it, but I think what would be of interest to most of us here is how sortition is actually operating in your world. What's the step-by-step?
Yeah, so what we were doing initially was there was an organisation called the Sortition Foundation who we outsourced it to, and they would carry out the sortition process for us. Essentially, you go out to students and ask students, do you want to be paid £40 plus pizza for 2 hours of your time? Sign up here, and they'd fill in all their information, their demographics that you're looking for. And then what we would previously do, send that off to Sortition Foundation, they spit out, you should invite these students. What we've now done is we've done in-house training with Sortition Foundation, where we can carry it out in-house. As previously it was a pretty penny each time, but it's one of those things where it's complicated when you first look at it, but after a while it ticks and it's all good.
Yes.
One of the things that I found problematic in terms of voice is student representations in the staff-student liaison committee. Where reps are elected, they're supposed to speak on behalf of their cohort, and they're finding it very difficult to get student feedback. It becomes a WhatsApp group with a couple of people. And the danger of that, in my view, for the student voice, it gets sidelined because it's not representative of the students' view. And Larry Kramer said this in the town hall, that we will not get involved in discussions with small groups of people. It has to come from the student union. So I think this idea of representation is one of the barriers to change, because it can be easily said that you're speaking for a small group. You're not speaking for. So I don't know how, so the same thing you find in the surveys. I mean, I sent like 8 or 9 reminders to get like 50% response. I don't know what the basis for that lack of response is. Yeah, I teach mostly postgraduates, so, but even an undergraduate level, that's the case. So I think this question about the everyday life of student engagement in the educational offering and the student union on the side are two sides of the same coin. I don't know how you deal with the second part of things.
Yeah, so I think this was something when we were doing the democracy review, what we were hearing back from students is kind of exactly what you said. Like, they were getting all of these emails through for surveys that they want to fill out, and they were getting email overload. They can't be bothered to fill out this stuff because they can't concretely see what are the results of doing that. Why should they bother, putting that time in to fill out that survey when, like, who knows what happens to it? What we were hearing was that students appreciate potentially quality over quantity. So rather than kind of like a survey, like very like high level that goes out to whoever can be bothered to fill it every month, there's less often more intense, in-depth, kind of one-to-one conversations where you're going into detail and able to properly talk about things, and then also to see what happens after that. An interesting thing in kind of what we're doing with student panels and via the sortition process is we're getting these students in, and they are representative of the student body demographics, but they are not representatives of them. So coming out of the other side of the student panels, in the ones that didn't go to referendum, the ones that passed when we did the recent student panel, they will have voted as a representative body in the sense that it's all the demographics there. But if a student goes forward and said, well, you're a black student on the student panel and you were meant to be representing black students, that's not the case. They're representing themselves. And I think if you approach it that way, it becomes, rather than it being like, oh, it's just a couple of students coming in and like saying their ideas, it's meant to be, this is a snapshot of the wider student body, their whole opinion. So if you approach it that way, I think you kind of remove out those things of like, well, we've got 2 responses from students, what's the point in that?
Yeah, it's really interesting, the kind of difference between the individual and the collective,
Yeah.
and how they work together in student voice structures. I'm very conscious of time and that we need to move on to the next session, so I just want to say thank you to Sinéad, thank you to